On her wedding night, Amara wasn't kissed by her husband. She was worn by a stranger hiding in her closet. "Choose," he whispered, "scream and die. Or stay quiet and destroy him first." What she didn't know, that stranger wasn't the danger dot her husband was. Amara had always imagined her wedding night would feel like the beginning of a fairy tale. Soft lighting, warm laughter still echoing from the reception, and the peaceful glow of a future she believed was finally secure. Standing alone in the quiet suite, she let her fingers brush the embroidered lace of her gown, savoring the moment with a kind of fragile pride. The world outside seemed distant, wrapped in a velvet silence broken only by her steady breathing. Kyria was downstairs, the loving, attentive husband she trusted blindly, sorting out something trivial with the hotel staff. And in a sudden burst of playfulness that felt like a well-earned reward after surviving grief, corporate pressure, and public expectations, she slipped into the walk-in closet to surprise him when he returned. But as she crouched between hanging coats and silk dresses, heart fluttering with anticipation, she didn't realize she was seconds away from the night that would erase the girl she used to be, and force a far more dangerous version of herself to be born. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a scream, or a door slamming, or even footsteps. It was the stillness, that eerie kind of stillness that stretches longer than it should. Amara counted to 3, ready to jump out with a laugh. But everything inside her froze when the silhouette entering the room didn't belong to her husband. The man in black moved with the certainty of someone who already knew the room, already knew his target, already knew exactly where she was hiding. His shoes sank silently into the plush carpet as he walked directly toward the closet, not glancing around, not hesitating, not pretending to search. And when he pulled the doors open with a single fluid motion, the world Amara knew collapsed in on itself. His face wasn't familiar, but the message he carried was, because in his hand wasn't a weapon. It was a phone. And on that phone was the voice of the man she loved, laughing, not lovingly, but cruelly, as he described the plan he'd spent years perfecting to destroy her from the inside out. As the audio spilled into the closet, something inside Amara buckled. She wasn't just hearing betrayal. She was hearing a blueprint for her psychological execution. Kyria spoke like a man rehearsing a script he'd memorized long ago, the fake church boy persona. The devotion he pretended to feel, the affection he weaponized so casually it sounded like second nature. And then came the cruelty, the plan to drug her, to trigger hallucinations, to imitate her mother's tragic decline, until Amara became a living certificate of madness. Every sentence felt like a blade piercing through the fragile version of love she had built around him. Behind the stranger's calm expression, behind his steady posture, Amara sensed urgency, not threat. He wasn't there to harm her. He was there to offer something far more terrifying, a choice. Confront Kyria immediately and lose. Or stay silent tonight and learn how to beat him at his own game. And in that moment, surrounded by luxury she no longer recognized as hers, she realized the truth. Villains don't always enter your life wearing masks. Sometimes they enter wearing wedding rings. When Kyria's voice echoed from the hallway, gentle, concerned, dripping with the false warmth that now made Amara's stomach turn, she felt the world split in two. The version of her who would scream, collapse, and hand him the victory he craved. And the version who would rise, swallow the pain, and transform into something far more dangerous than the fragile bride he thought he could break. With trembling hands, she wiped her tears and nodded at the stranger's silent command. She walked to the bathroom, washed her face, and rehearsed the performance that would save her life. Because from this night forward, she wasn't just a wife. She was a woman entering a psychological battlefield. And whether she realized it or not, this was the night Amara stepped out of the role Kyria had written for her and into the role of the woman who would destroy him. Before that night, before the closet, before the stranger with the ice-cold warning, Amara had lived inside a carefully crafted illusion. From the outside, her relationship with Kyria looked almost poetic, the loyal man of faith who supported her through the loss of her parents, the patient partner who stood by her as she took the reins of the Vance Legacy Group, the charming presence her community adored. And because grief makes the heart crave stability, Amara clung to his devotion with a kind of hopeful blindness. She believed in his gentle tone, in the way he prayed with her, in the reassuring touches that made her feel like the world hadn't completely collapsed after losing her mother and father. What no one told her, what she couldn't imagine, was that people like Kiri don't just stumble into your life. They study you. They look for the cracks, the wounds, the vulnerabilities you're desperate to soothe. And then they mold themselves into the perfect cure. Kiri's transformation into the ideal husband hadn't been accidental, it had been strategic. Every Sunday at church, he played the role flawlessly, punctual, respectful, devoted. He sat beside her during sermons with the posture of a man who had been raised in moral discipline. And when she broke down over company stress or memories of her parents, he always offered the right words, the right patience, the right kind of embrace. With time, Amara stopped questioning why he seemed so perfect. Because perfection feels comforting when your world has been shattered. She didn't notice the small red flags, the forced humility in front of others, the way he studied her father's business decisions too closely, the glint of calculation behind his smile. In her grief, she mistook manipulation for protection and performance for love. By the time she said, "I do," Kiri had embedded himself into every corner of her life, her home, her company, her trust, her routines, even her memories of healing. He had become indispensable. By design. But behind his rehearsed tenderness lived a man with a different hunger, one her eyes were too gentle to see until it was almost too late. Kiri didn't aspire to be a husband. He aspired to be a king with access to wealth, power, influence, and a corporate empire built on Marcus Vance's years of sacrifice. And because he couldn't inherit that empire through merit, he planned to steal it through marriage. The day he convinced Amara he loved her was the day he secured his first foothold inside the Vance kingdom. The day she let him take the reins at the company events, the board meetings, the charity galas. That was step 2. And the day she walked down the aisle believing she was gaining a partner. Kiri believed he was gaining a throne. What Amara experienced as love had always been a blueprint. What she saw as loyalty had always been leverage. And what she thought was destiny was only ever a well-timed trap. But even the most meticulous predators make one fatal mistake. They underestimate the strength of the prey. Kiri could imitate empathy, he could rehearse affection, he could forge a perfect facade, but what he couldn't predict was Amara's capacity for transformation. He believed her grief made her weak. He believed her compassion made her blind. He believed her love made her easy to break. He had spent years studying her vulnerabilities, but he never once studied her resilience. And so on the night he planned to begin his slow psychological kill, she discovered the truth instead. On the night he thought he would own her future, she began writing a different one. Kiri didn't realize it yet, but the moment Amara wiped her tears in that hotel bathroom, the blueprint changed hands entirely. The predator had miscalculated, and the woman he planned to destroy was about to become the force that would dismantle everything he built. The man standing in front of Amara wasn't a thief, an intruder, or some random danger who had wandered into the wrong hotel suite. Even in her panic, she could sense it. The measured breathing, the steady gaze, the way his hands stayed visible instead of reaching for harm. He wasn't there to kill her. He was there because someone else planned to. His name, she would learn later, was Idris Bishop. But in that moment, crouched inside the closet with shattered illusions clinging to her like broken glass, he was just a stranger holding the weapon that would upend her world, the truth. And unlike Kiri's soft lies, this truth didn't arrive wrapped in sweetness. It arrived in the form of a recording. Kiri's voice, dripping with satisfaction, outlining step by step how he would twist her mind until she mirrored her mother's tragic decline. How he would use her grief as a blueprint to break her. How he would claim her inheritance piece by piece until she was no longer a wife, just a diagnosis. Idris didn't speak as the audio played. He didn't need to. Every word Kiri spat out tightened the noose around Amara's heart. When the recording shifted from cold manipulation to casual laughter, Kiri mocking her loyalty, calling her gullible, bragging to Sienna about how easy it was to fool a woman desperate for stability. Something inside Amara cracked in a way that felt irreversible. Suddenly the wedding gown felt heavy, like a costume she had been tricked into wearing. The rose petals scattered across the suite felt like decorations for her own burial. By the time the recording ended, she was no longer crying because she was afraid of the stranger in black. She was crying because, for the first time, she finally saw the man she had married, not as a husband, but as a predator who had studied her pain and fed on it. Idris knelt down, not to comfort her, but to deliver the second blow. This wasn't an accident, Amara. He's been planning this for 2 years. She wanted to scream. She wanted to burst out of the closet and throw the recording in Kiri's face. But Idris, calm despite the urgency ticking around them, leaned closer and whispered the words that froze her rage into strategy. If you confront him now, he wins. His voice wasn't sympathetic. It was tactical. He explained how Kiri had already rehearsed a script to make her look unhinged. How any outburst would be chalked up to wedding stress. How he would twist her reactions into proof that she was unstable. And when Kiri's voice echoed from outside the door, cheerful, sweet, calling her name, it became terrifyingly clear that Idris was right. Kiri didn't need evidence, he needed opportunity. One emotional mistake from Amara, one crack in her composure, and he would weaponize it instantly. The stranger's warning wasn't just a lifeline. It was a blueprint of its own. If she wanted to survive, she would have to become the actress Kiri never imagined she could be. Idris pointed toward the bathroom with a quick, precise gesture, the kind of gesture someone makes when they've studied danger long enough to predict it. Wash your face. Hide the crying. Step out like nothing happened, he murmured, already moving toward the balcony to vanish before Kyrie could see him. And Amara, shaking but determined, obeyed. She splashed cold water on her cheeks, masked the redness around her eyes, and practiced a tired smile in the mirror. When she finally opened the suite door and greeted Kyrie, she felt something shift inside her. The death of innocence and the birth of resolve. He hugged her like a doting husband. She stood still like a woman burying her former self. Because from this night forward, she wasn't just a bride, she was a survivor being reborn. And Kyrie had no idea that the fragile woman he thought he controlled had just chosen war. The next morning, as sunlight spilled across the silk sheets and painted the room in gold, Amara woke up in a world that looked the same but felt completely different. Kyrie hummed in the shower like a man who believed everything was under control, while Amara lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling as reality rearranged itself inside her chest. The woman Kyrie expected to see, gentle, trusting, emotionally malleable, had died the moment she heard his voice conspiring to destroy her. But if she wanted to survive his plan, she had to resurrect that version of herself just long enough to fool him. So when Kyrie stepped out of the bathroom with a towel around his waist and a bright, casual, "Good morning, my queen," she forced herself to smile. She let him kiss her forehead. She let him drape his arm around her like he always did. And when he asked if she slept well, she lied smoothly, "Yes, baby. I think I just needed rest." Inside, her heartbeat throbbed with rage, but on the outside, she looked exactly like the woman he thought he still owned. Kyrie had no idea that the perfect wife sitting across from him at breakfast was carefully analyzing every blink, every gesture, every micro-expression on his face. She watched the way he monitored her plate, the way his eyes lingered on the tea he pushed toward her, the way he assessed her mood with trained precision. He wasn't caring, he was calibrating. She remembered Idris's warning, "He'll try to break you from the inside. Don't give him a crack to exploit." So Amara played her role with unsettling ease. She held her spoon with a faint tremble, let her shoulders slump as though weighed down by invisible stress, and spoke in soft, uncertain tones. Kyrie ate it up. The faintest twitch of satisfaction pulled at the corner of his mouth, subtle but unmistakable. Her fragility was confirmation that his plan was working, and the more he believed she was slipping, the safer she became. Because a predator who thinks he's already won is the easiest one to outsmart. Over the next few days, Amara transformed her home into a theater. In front of Kyrie, she misplaced her keys and apologized with anxious confusion. In front of Sienna, she hesitated when greeting the housekeeper, pretending she'd forgotten the woman's name. She stared too long at blank walls, sighed heavily at random moments, and let her voice crack as though her mind was overwhelmed by shadows. Every mistake was intentional, every stumble was calculated. And the effect was immediate. Kyrie began logging her behavior on his phone, meticulously recording each moment he believed his poison was taking effect. Sienna, convinced Amara was unraveling, whispered comforting lies while exchanging smug glances with Kyrie behind Amara's back. Neither of them noticed the tiny cameras hidden between books and behind paintings, the very cameras Idris had slipped into her purse the night of the wedding. They watched her perform and believed it. But Amara also watched them, and she believed nothing. The most difficult moments weren't the lies she told or the exhaustion of acting constantly. It was enduring Kyrie's tenderness she now recognized as a weapon. When he caressed her cheek and murmured, "I'm worried about you," she had to fight the urge to recoil. When he prayed over her at night, she had to stop herself from screaming. And when he brought her tea to help calm her nerves, she had to accept the cup with shaking hands while ensuring not a single drop touched her lips. The guilt, the betrayal, the fury, she buried it all beneath a mask so flawless it frightened even her. But each performance, each forced smile, each staged breakdown brought her closer to the one thing Kyrie never planned for, a wife who wasn't losing her mind, but building her case. And as the days unfolded, Amara realized something powerful. She wasn't just pretending to be weak. She was learning how strong she truly was. The first time Kyrie brought her the tea, Amara felt something icy crawl down her spine. The cup looked harmless, delicate porcelain, floral design, steam curling upward like a gentle invitation. But beneath the jasmine scent was the faintest chemical sharpness, an odor so subtle most people wouldn't notice, but her instincts screamed. Kyrie sat beside her on the bed, guiding the cup into her hands the way a caretaker would soothe a trembling patient. "It's good for your nerves," he assured her, voice warm, eyes calculating. And for a moment, Amara felt the full weight of what he was trying to do. This wasn't just poisoning. It was a ritual, a slow unraveling meant to mimic her mother's descent, a crafted tragedy he could later point to as genetic. But Amara didn't flinch. She lifted the cup to her lips, pretending to sip, letting the heat touch only her mouth. When she coughed dramatically and set it aside, Kyrie merely smiled, satisfied. He thought he'd begun the process of breaking her. In reality, he had just given Amara her first piece of undeniable proof. Every day that followed became a dance of deception. Kyrie prepared tea at night, in the morning, and sometimes in the afternoon, always with the same hovering watchfulness. When he turned to grab his phone or answer a call, Amara would tilt the cup toward a potted plant beside the bed, letting the poisonous mixture seep silently into the soil. The snake plant, ironically resilient by nature, began to wither within days, its once sturdy leaves curling inward like a choking throat. Amara recorded everything. The hidden cameras Idris had planted captured Kyrie opening small packets of white powder, glancing around to ensure he wasn't being watched, then stirring it into her drink with clinical precision. The footage revealed the truth she already knew. Kyrie wasn't just trying to make her unstable, he was escalating. His doses were increasing, his patience thinning. And the weight of his desperation pressed into the air of every room she entered. Yet he never noticed her steady hands, her sharp timing, her secretly strengthened resolve. He believed she was weakening. Because that's what he wanted to see. The turning point came during a shareholders' meeting, a day Kyrie had strategically chosen for her public unraveling. He dressed her himself, smoothing the sleeves of her blazer, guiding her into the car with a tenderness that made her skin crawl. He expected her to slur her words, stumble through the financial report, embarrass herself in front of the board, and she played along at first. When she stood in the conference room, she let her fingers fumble with the papers, hesitated mid-sentence, and blinked rapidly as though her mind were fogging. Kyrie watched from the corner, his arms folded, confidence radiating from him like smug perfume. But then, at the critical moment, Amara straightened. Her voice grounded. Her eyes sharpened. She delivered a flawless, articulate explanation of the quarter's projections, fielded a barrage of investor questions, and even closed with a strategic initiative proposal her father would have been proud of. The entire room applauded. Kyrie's face drained of color. And in that applause, Amara felt something ignite, the first flicker of power returning to her. He couldn't call her unstable if she outperformed every executive in the room. She wasn't slipping. She was stepping back into her rightful place. That night, when Kyrie returned to the kitchen to prepare yet another dose, Amara watched through the hidden camera feed with a strange, icy calm. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was documenting, cataloging, building a war chest of evidence. And when Kyrie handed her the tea with that same soft, poisonous smile, she realized he hadn't noticed the shift in her eyes. She had become an actress of terrifying precision. She sipped at the cup's rim, careful not to drink, then set it down with a small sigh. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. "Maybe I really am tired." Kyrie nodded, believing he had her cornered. But Amara wasn't tired. She was calculating. She wasn't falling apart. She was watching him dig his own grave, sip by sip, lie by lie. And as she poured the tainted tea into the plant once again, she knew something with absolute clarity. If Kyrie wanted to poison her future, she would poison his plans first. And the antidote wasn't resistance, it was strategy. The day Amara discovered Sienna's secret apartment, the city felt unusually still, like the world itself was holding its breath. She had spent weeks pretending to crumble under Kyrie's manipulations, enduring his poisoned tea and his cold calculations, all while quietly gathering evidence. But tonight's mission was different. This wasn't about playing the fragile wife anymore. This was about stepping into the shadows where Kyrie and Sienna had been hiding their real lives. Sienna had left that morning with a practiced smile, claiming she had a full day at the beauty salon. But Amara knew better. Thanks to Idris's quiet tracking, she knew exactly where Sienna's other life was stored. Wearing black clothes, cap pulled low, Amara slipped out the back door and into a waiting taxi arranged by Idris. As the taxi drove through downtown Atlanta, she stared out the window at her own reflection. No longer the grieving heiress, no longer the manipulated wife, but a woman preparing to uncover proof that could burn an entire empire of lies to the ground. The building that housed Sienna's apartment looked ordinary from the outside, the kind of quiet mid-rise complex most people would walk past without a second thought. But the moment Amara stepped inside with Idris's Copic key fob, her pulse hammered with danger. The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor ticked by like a countdown. At the 10th floor, she paused, listening. Silence. Perfect. She unlocked the door with slow, deliberate precision, slipping into a space that felt frozen in time. The apartment wasn't messy, yet it wasn't lived in either. A carefully staged hideout. Her flashlight skimmed over glossy wigs on stands, designer clothes strewn across a chair, and makeup brushes still dusted with powder. Then she found what Idris had warned her about, the safe. The metal box was tucked behind a row of old coats, tucked away like a secret no one was meant to find. Her hands trembled as she placed the code-cracking device Idris provided onto the keypad. The screen blinked, tested combinations. And after 2 agonizing minutes that felt like hours, a green light flashed. Click. The door opened, and so did the truth. Inside the safe lay the proof of a life Amara had never been meant to see. Stacks of cash. Jewelry bought with stolen money. Fake passports with Kyrie's photo but a different name. A hidden marriage certificate proving that Kyrie and Sienna had been secretly husband and wife, Long before Amara had walked down the aisle, the betrayal hit Amara like a physical blow. Marriage wasn't just a scam for power. Kyria had built an entire fictional identity to infiltrate her family. And then she found the most devastating document of all. Financial transactions tied to her father's death. Kyria's payments to an ex-mechanic just days before the brake failure that killed Marcus Vance. Her chest tightened as she flipped through the papers, her vision blurring. This wasn't a love story gone wrong. It wasn't even a simple con. It was murder. Her father's death had been orchestrated, calculated, signed in cold blood by the man she had once trusted to protect her. She felt her knees weaken. The room spun. But she didn't crumble, not this time. Instead, she photographed every document, every signature, every number. Evidence this big didn't just expose Kyria, it erased the illusion he had built around her life. Just as she zipped the folder into her backpack, the sound that froze her heart echoed through the apartment, the front door unlocking. Sienna's voice drifted in, annoyed, complaining about the salon being closed. Amara's mind raced. There was no time to escape through the window, no time to run. She dove into the opposite side of the closet, hiding behind a wall of coats just as Sienna stepped into the bedroom. It felt like reliving the wedding night. The closet, the breathless stillness, the terror pressing into her ribs. Sienna's hand gripped the closet handle, the door began to swing open. And then salvation arrived in the form of chaos. A fire alarm blared through the entire building, shrill, deafening, urgent. Smoke warnings boomed from the speakers. Sienna cursed loudly and sprinted out of the room, forgetting all about the jacket she came for. Amara didn't waste a second. She slipped out of the apartment, mask on, backpack secure, and merged into the flow of evacuating residents. Downstairs, Idris was waiting in a black sedan, engine running. When she handed him the folder, he scanned its contents, then looked at her with something like astonished respect. "With this," he said quietly, "we won't just expose them. We'll bury them." And as the car pulled away, Amara realized something profound. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her father, for her mother, for herself. And she was going to win. By the time Amara returned home with the truth tucked safely inside her bag, the mansion no longer felt like the sanctuary she grew up in. It felt like a battlefield. Every hallway a trap, every room a stage where she had to perform for her enemy. Kyria and Sienna had no idea that she had just cracked their entire operation open. They didn't know she had proof of the poisoned tea, proof of the fake marriage, proof of the stolen money. And worst of all, proof that her father's death wasn't an accident. But Amara didn't expose them right away. She understood something they never expected. A war is won not by striking first, but by striking last, when the enemy has already weakened themselves. So when she entered the living room that night and found Sienna lounging comfortably on her mother's favorite sofa, wearing a smug smile and pretending to be family, Amara smiled back. A soft, warm smile. The kind a woman gives right before she blindsides you. Because the more comfortable they felt, the more reckless they would become. She watched closely as Kyria and Sienna began to reveal the cracks in their alliance. Paranoia works quickly on guilty minds, and Amara took advantage of it with surgical precision. One evening, she casually mentioned that Kyria had been talking in his sleep, muttering something about getting rid of Sienna once the money comes in. The lie was so simple it was elegant. And Sienna, already insecure, already jealous, already hungry for control, fell for it instantly. Her eyes widened, her breath hitched, and her mask slipped. That night, the hidden cameras in the guest room captured a vicious argument, Sienna accusing Kyria of planning to abandon her, Kyria yelling that she was paranoid and dramatic. Their partnership, once airtight, began to corrode from the inside. And Amara watched it all on her burner phone, the footage playing like a private show crafted just for her. They weren't just breaking down. They were unraveling. And they had no idea who was pulling the threads. But the real turning point came when Kyria's financial pressure peaked. The fake real estate investment Idris created, complete with polished brochures, forged contracts, and a promise of triple returns, was the perfect bait for a man drowning in debt. Kyria swallowed it whole. He begged Amara to sign off on the transfer, insisting it would secure her father's legacy. She played hesitant, fragile, overwhelmed, every expression crafted to match the woman he believed she was. And when she finally scribbled her signature, altering her handwriting just enough to prove duress later, Kyria lit up with relief. He didn't notice the trap sealing around him. He didn't feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. While he celebrated, believing millions were headed into his personal accounts, Idris directed the money into evidence-locked holdings instead, funds Kyria would later be accused of stealing. Amara wasn't just exposing him. She was turning him into the architect of his own downfall. And every move he made tightened the noose he had placed around his own neck. Meanwhile, Amara escalated her performance, inching Kyria toward desperation. She staged panic attacks that lasted just long enough to seem real. She dropped dishes by accident, stared at corners with trembling whispers, and let tears spill when Sienna demanded attention. It all fed perfectly into Kyria's expectation that the drugs were working faster than planned. "She's declining," he whispered to Sienna, thinking no one else could hear. "Soon she won't be able to run the company at all." What he didn't know was that every whisper, every smirk, every whispered insult was captured on camera, evidence Amara would later use to publicly dismantle him. The mansion had become a cage, yes. But not for her, for them. They thought they were tightening their grip on her sanity. But Amara, calm, calculating, relentless, was tightening her grip on their fate. And the day was coming when they would finally realize the truth. They hadn't been hunting her. They'd been walking straight into her trap. The Vance Legacy Group Anniversary Gala was meant to be a night of elegance, prestige, and polished speeches. The kind of evening where the city's elite clinked champagne glasses and whispered about new investments. But to Amara, it was more than an event. It was a stage. A perfectly lit arena where truth could hit harder than any bullet. As she stepped into the ballroom wearing a deep blue gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, she carried herself with the quiet authority of a woman who had clawed her way through fire. Kyria stood beside her, perfectly groomed, perfectly confident, perfectly oblivious that his kingdom was about to collapse in front of everyone who mattered to him. Photographers snapped pictures, executives shook his hand, and reporters praised him. Yet the sweat gathering beneath his collar betrayed a deeper fear. Amara's behavior had shifted. She was too calm, too poised, too collected for a woman he believed was unraveling. If he noticed anything at all, it was that she moved with purpose tonight. A purpose he couldn't recognize. Because it wasn't his. From across the ballroom, Sienna hovered near the bar in a dress too bold for the occasion, her eyes darting between Kyria and Amara with restless anxiety. Rumors whispered through the crowd about her presence, her relationship with Kyria, and the inappropriate closeness the two shared. Amara didn't need to expose anything yet. Sienna's own discomfort painted the picture for her. As speeches began, Kyria strutted onto the stage with a microphone in hand, eager for the spotlight he believed he deserved. He launched into a grand monologue about innovation, legacy, and his role in supporting his wife's vision. The words tasted like poison. Amara stood off to the side, her posture statuesque, her expression unreadable. Then, just as Kyria reached the height of his speech, the lights flickered. The sound system hummed. And the massive projector behind him ignited with a glow that silenced the entire room. Not with charts. Not with company highlights. But with the one thing neither Kyria nor Sienna ever expected to see at an event this public, their own faces. Caught on camera, mocking Amara, plotting her downfall, poisoning her drinks. Gasps rippled through the ballroom like a shockwave. Executives rushed forward. Journalists fumbled for their cameras. The footage played clearly. Kyria stirring powder into Amara's tea, Sienna laughing as they discussed how easy it was to fool her. The forged documents showing Kyria's fake identity, and the religious marriage certificate proving he had married Sienna long before Amara ever stepped into the picture. Then came the audio. Kyria explaining how he would slowly destroy Amara psychologically, referencing her mother's depression, mocking her grief, detailing the plan to secure her inheritance. The ballroom erupted in disbelief. Some people cursed under their breath. Others stared at Kyria, though he were a monster unveiled. Even the board members, men who once praised him, recoiled. Kyria stumbled backward, his face draining of color, his mouth opening and closing without words. He lunged for the microphone, shouting, "This is fake, deep fakes, lies," but the room wasn't listening. His voice had been recorded too clearly. His actions captured too explicitly. His guilt was undeniable. He wasn't just exposed, he was stripped. Just as Kyria attempted to flee the stage, pushing through photographers and panicked guests, he collided with a figure waiting calmly by the emergency exit. Idris. His presence was as unmistakable as a shadow before a storm. Kyria swung wildly, but Idris disarmed him with swift precision, pinning him against the wall just as uniformed officers entered the ballroom. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Amara had planned every second. As Kyria was handcuffed and dragged through the flashing cameras, Sienna panicked, rushing forward and screaming that she was the victim, that Kyria had forced everything, that she could help the police. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Her name was already on forged documents. Her voice already recorded in conspiratorial whispers. Officers surrounded her as well, escorting her from the event in disgrace. And as the ballroom erupted into a frenzy of whispered conversations, flashing lights, and reporters rushing for statements, Amara stood perfectly still at center stage. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply watched the downfall of the man who had tried so hard to erase her, and finally understood the power of reclaiming her own narrative. This was not revenge. This was justice. Delivered in the brightest room Kyria could have imagined. The gala had ended with sirens, flashing cameras, and a hard metallic click of handcuffs around Kyria's wrists. But humiliation wasn't enough for a man who had built his entire identity on control. In the days that followed, the justice system moved slowly, frustratingly slowly. Despite the mountains of evidence, a crafty liar managed to secure him temporary house arrest under the guise of medical issues. Sienna, locked in a regular cell, began turning on him immediately, feeding detectives more information in exchange for leniency. And while the world saw Kyria as exposed, ruined, defeated, Amara knew better. A wounded predator is always the most dangerous. Alone in a cheap motel with nothing left to lose, Kyria stood in rage. He drank, paced, plotted, and stared at the illegal pistol he'd bought with his last crumpled bills. His pride had been shattered in front of the city, his future reduced to a prison sentence, and his ego couldn't accept that Amara, the woman he once called weak, had outsmarted him. In the storm outside, thunder boomed, and with every strike of lightning his resolve hardened. He wasn't going to let her win. Not alive. The night he broke into the mansion, the rain fell in violent sheets, drenching the gardens and making the security cameras glitch at the corners. Kyria moved through the shadows with the familiarity of a man who had once ruled the home. He scaled the ivy-covered wall, pried open an old kitchen window he had personally installed back when he pretended to be helpful, and slipped inside. The scent of lavender and polished wood, once comforting, now ignited a bitterness he couldn't swallow. He navigated the hallways with a quiet fury, one hand gripping the gun tucked inside his jacket. Every step echoed like a twisted countdown. But when he entered the living room, expecting darkness, expecting silence, a light flicked on. Idris sat in an armchair as if he'd been waiting for this very moment. Calm, steady, unshaken. "Everyone slips eventually," he said coldly. "I knew you'd come crawling back." Kyria's face twisted, rage bubbling over, and he pulled the gun in one shaking motion. Idris moved fast, not fast enough to avoid the bullet grazing his arm, but fast enough to get behind cover. The gunshot thundered through the house. Upstairs, Amara jolted awake. Amara didn't freeze this time. She didn't crumble. She ran toward the staircase, her heartbeat pounding in her throat. At the landing, she saw him, Kyrie, soaked, wild-eyed, panting like an animal cornered by fate itself. His tuxedo jacket was gone, his shirt ripped, rain streaking down his face as if the storm were part of him. "Amara," he hissed, gun pointed directly at her. "We're going to end this together." She stepped back instinctively, but instead of retreating deeper into the bedroom, she fled to the balcony, a bold move that forced him to follow. Wind whipped through her hair as the rain hammered the tiles beneath her feet. She backed against the railing, breath sharp, eyes locked on his. Kyrie stepped closer, gun raised, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. "You ruined everything," he spat. "All because you couldn't stay in your place." His voice trembled with hatred, fear, and delusion. Amara lifted her chin, refusing to let him steal one more ounce of her dignity. "The weak woman you preyed on died the night I learned what you did," she whispered. "You should have feared the woman who stood up in her place." Kyrie scoffed and tightened his grip on the gun. Before he could fire, Idris emerged behind him, wounded but relentless. He tackled Kyrie hard, sending both men crashing onto the rain-slicked balcony tiles. The gun skittered across the floor toward a planter. They fought viciously, fists, elbows, desperation in every blow. Idris was strong but injured. Kyrie was deranged, operating on pure adrenaline. When Kyrie broke free and lunged toward the gun, Idris shouted, "Amara, run!" But she didn't run, she charged. She remembered Idris teaching her how to strike, how to defend, how to survive, and she used it. With every ounce of strength in her, Amara drove her heel into Kyrie's chest, knocking the wind out of him. He slipped, stumbled, arms flailing for balance. The rain made the tiles slick, the balcony railing low, a design choice Kyrie had made for aesthetics, never imagining it would betray him. Amara shoved him again, a primal burst of strength fueled by months of terror and betrayal. Kyrie's eyes widened in a mix of shock and disbelief as his body tipped backward over the edge. His scream tore through the rain. And then came the sickening crash as he landed first on Idris's car roof, then onto the stone pavement below, broken, defeated, alive, but only barely. The king had finally fallen, not by fate, not by accident, but by the hands of the woman he thought he owned. The weeks after Kyrie's fall felt surreal, as if Amara were drifting through a world that finally matched her breathing again. The rain-soaked chaos of that night gave way to sterile courtrooms, flashing news cameras, and a justice system slowly turning its wheels. Kyrie appeared at his hearings in a wheelchair, gaunt and gray, the consequences of his violence carved into the lines of his face. Sienna arrived shackled, stripped of her glamorous persona, screaming accusations at anyone who would listen. But the evidence was overwhelming. The poisoning attempts, the fraud, the forged identities, the financial crimes, the attempted murder. And when investigators confirmed the truth about Marcus Vance's sabotaged car, the courtroom seemed to collectively recoil. Both Kyrie and Sienna were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Sienna collapsed into frantic sobs. Kyrie simply stared at the floor, the weight of reality finally crushing the arrogance he once wore like armor. Amara watched quietly, no triumph in her expression, only a profound, steady calm. The storm was ending. Justice, though painful and delayed, had arrived. In the aftermath, Amara rebuilt her life with the same precision and strength she had used to dismantle her enemies. The Vance Legacy Group flourished under her leadership. She removed corrupt board members placed by Kyrie, tightened internal controls, and redirected company resources toward community programs in honor of her parents. For the first time in years, the halls of her office echoed with purposeful footsteps rather than manipulation. Reporters began calling her the Iron Lady of the Vance Empire, but Amara didn't seek the title. She sought peace, a quiet kind, the kind her parents would have wanted for her. One afternoon, she walked through the cemetery with 2 bouquets of lily, placing them gently on her parents' graves. It's done, she whispered. They paid for everything they did to us. And I'm still standing. A soft breeze brushed her cheek like a familiar touch, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe without the weight of survival pressing on her chest. She wasn't just alive. She was free. Idris appeared beside her that day, not as the shadowy stranger who had once burst into her life, but as a steady presence she had come to trust more deeply than she expected. His arm had healed, though a faint scar remained, a reminder of their shared battle. He handed her a folder, the official closure of the case, and for a moment, they stood in comfortable silence. When he mentioned that Vance Holdings was searching for a new head of security, Amara caught the hint immediately. She teased him gently, asking if he could handle the long hours and the possibility of work dinners. Idris smiled. A real smile, open and warm, nothing like the guarded expressions he used to wear. They didn't talk about love or future promises. They didn't need to. Their connection had grown slowly, quietly in the spaces between danger and healing. For now, trust was enough. And trust, Amara knew, was more valuable than anything she had ever inherited. That night, back in the mansion she had reclaimed, Amara walked into the master bedroom she had redecorated entirely, softer colors, warmer light, no trace of Kiri's presence. She opened her new walk-in closet and looked at the rows of neatly arranged suits, dresses, and shoes. Then her eyes fell to a small black business card tucked safely in a velvet box. Idris's old card, the one he had slipped into the sofa the night everything changed. She held it for a moment, then smiled and placed it gently back. Not as a keepsake of fear, but as a reminder of resilience. A reminder that she had been broken, hunted, betrayed, and still risen. She closed the closet door with a firm, satisfying click, then slipped into bed, turning off the lamp beside her. For the first time in years, sleep came easily, no nightmares, no fear, no footsteps approaching in the dark. Just peace earned, fought for, and finally hers to keep. The storm had passed, and on the other side, Amara found the beginning of a life she finally deserved.